Welcome to the Daily News Currents. Today is February 10th, and for today's headlines we have Trump's executive actions are getting challenged as arbitrary. What does that mean? Dad, I came back alive. Israeli hostages start to give glimpses of ordeal. Millions will see the Super Bowl ad. Health experts and 2 senators aren't pleased. 3 men convicted of playing a role in a ring that preyed on U.S. museums. And passengers restrain man who bashed a window on a flight. Trump's executive actions are getting challenged as arbitrary. What does that mean? President Trump has signed a number of executive actions since taking office, taking aim at everything from immigration and the size of federal workforce to gender politics and the economy. Before the ink has dried, challengers took legal action to block many of the actions taking effect. Less than 3 weeks into the new administration, courts are already considering challenges to Trump's declaration that the federal government will only recognize 2 genders. The Department of Homeland Security's departure from the decades-old policy that encouraged immigration and customs enforcement to avoid places of worship, and the Fork Directive email offering federal employees the option to resign in exchange for full pay and benefits through September. At the center of these challenges is the question of whether the president's actions are directing federal agencies to violate a key standard established nearly 80 years ago in a law known as the Administrative Procedure Act. The law was drawn up as a way to protect against agency overreach and actions that might be deemed arbitrary and capricious. Groups are using it to challenge presidential policies by targeting the administration's administrative agencies tasked with carrying out Trump's will. Here's how the law works. What is the Administrative Procedure Act? Enacted in 1946 on the heels of the New Deal's expansion of governmental administration, the Administrative Procedure Act became both the foundation and a guardrail for all regulatory actions coming from the executive branch. All cabinet departments, like the Defense Department or the Treasury, as well as independent agencies like the Securities and Exchange Commission, must comply with the APA in all policy actions or decisions. The APA was signed by President Harry Truman and received bipartisan support after a decades-long effort by Republican and Democratic lawmakers. Concerned with the burgeoning administrative state after the New Deal expanded the role of executive agencies, Republicans wanted judges to review and curb the executive branch's growing influence. Democrats saw administrative action as an efficient means for advancing public policy, since it doesn't need to go through Congress. They wanted to use the act as a roadmap directing agencies to set consistent, effective policies. Why does the Administrative Procedure Act matter? Presidents often enter office with a political agenda that touches on a number of issues. That agenda can become policy if the president is successful in pushing new laws through Congress. Other times, a president may choose to set policy by issuing an executive action, which does not need to go through Congress to have legal force. However, the president cannot single-handedly turn ideas into actions. That is where executive agencies come in. Most executive actions set a policy and then direct the responsible federal agencies to take steps to carry out that policy. For instance, declaring an emergency at the U.S.-Mexico border required a joint effort among the State Department, the Justice Department, and the Department of Homeland Security, including some of its smaller agencies like Customs and Border Protection. If the president is the executive branch's brain, these agencies are the lens. Carrying out the president's directive in an executive order requires these agencies to issue rules, policies, and judgments that align with the president's stated goals. Everything executive agencies do to implement the president's agenda must follow the APA. Anytime the Federal Communications Commission bans profanity from the airwaves, say, or whenever the Environmental Protection Agency issues a permit, the agency must comply with the APA procedures. This is one way to ensure the executive branch stays within its stated role, which Georgetown law professor David Super told NPR's Morning Edition is important to preserving the meaning of U.S. laws. Our Constitution says the president shall take care that the laws are faithfully executed, said Super. If the president pushes policies that exceed our notions of what the executive can do, Super warns, any president in the future can largely do whatever they want. Importantly, the APA also allows anyone harmed by an agency's action to file a lawsuit stopping the agency from enforcing it. Federal courts then review the validity of the policy based on standards provided by the APA. While not all of Trump's executive actions have implicated the APA, this is a key area in which groups are hoping to successfully challenge some of Trump's policies. However, the use of this standard is not unique to those challenging the Trump administration. Every president who has served since 1946, notes Super, at one point or another has run up against the arbitrary and capricious standard. What is an arbitrary and capricious agency action? The core feature of the APA is protecting against arbitrary and capricious agency actions. The goal for challengers is for judges to find an agency policy so absurd that it is considered arbitrary, canceling its enforcement. Asked what this means in practice, Super explained, that means that there have to be permissible reasons for things that are done. It's fine if I decide that your business should be suspended because you're selling dangerous foods. It is not fine if I say your business should be suspended because I don't like you, he said. The standard is useful because it allows courts to invalidate a policy even when the agency has otherwise complied with the APA's requirements, which include things like notifying the public of a proposed rule and inviting public commentary or promptly explaining the denial of a grant application. In other words, even if the agency followed all other APA rules in issuing an action, a court could still invalidate the action for being arbitrary. However, an arbitrary and capricious review is not always an easy bar to meet. Judges must defer to an agency's decision and finding unless they seem patently unresponsible. While plaintiffs could challenge agency actions under standards with a higher bar, it is incredibly common to challenge agency actions as arbitrary and capricious because this standard is commonly used to evaluate agencies' rule-making procedures and policy decisions. When do courts tend to find that an agency action is arbitrary? There are a number of reasons a court might strike down an arbitrary agency action. Some cases center on the evidence that agencies must provide to justify their actions. A court may find that the agency's evidence or fact-finding was incomplete or lacked merit. Other actions are struck down for a clear error in the agency's judgment. Sometimes, a court is not satisfied with the agency considering every relevant alternative when formulating the policy. The federal employees challenging the Fork Directive email couched this as a failure to consider possible adverse consequences. When agencies have a certain way of doing things, and suddenly depart from those practices without any explanation, a court may consider that departure arbitrary. While agencies do not have an obligation to issue lengthy explanations for policy changes, they typically must do enough to acknowledge the change. Similarly, the challenges in the ICE enforcement case assert that DHS was required to, but did not, explain its change after 30 years of congruence, relying on places of worship as a refuge from ICE operations. An action is also invalidated under the arbitrary and capricious standard when it is otherwise prohibited by law. In Doe v. McHenry, a case brought last week by incarcerated transgender women suing to prevent their transfer to a male federal prison, the plaintiffs argue that Trump's gender ideology executive order is arbitrary, in part because it violates their statutory rights. Rarer are those agency actions that are blocked because a court is skeptical of policymakers' moves. In 2019, the Supreme Court struck down an attempt by Trump's Department of Commerce to include a citizenship question on the 2020 census because, as Super highlights, Chief Justice John Roberts found the stated reasons for the agency's action is disingenuous. How might this play out in courts? Some courts have already temporarily blocked some of Trump's executive actions, and there may be more actions ahead. However, a temporary pause is not the final word on whether an action is lawful. After an action is halted, it cannot be enforced while the federal courts determine its legality. If a court does determine a policy is unlawful, the federal government may still appeal it. Many of these challenges are expected to reach the Supreme Court, which will have the final say on whether the action is truly arbitrary. Dad, I came back alive. Israeli hostages start to give a glimpse of the ordeal. Hostages freed before Saturday exchange have expressed relief and joy, while descriptions of the torment they endured are trickling out. Dawn Steinbrecher vowed that she would never wear pink again when she made her first public comments in a video after being freed from more than 15 months in Hamas captivity in Gaza. A year ago, she appeared in a hostage video made by her captors wearing a pale rose-colored sweatshirt. When the Palestinian militant group Hamas released her last month, she was dressed in a bright magenta tracksuit and looked pale. Sitting in front of the camera took her back to the difficult moments when her captors filmed her in Gaza. Miss Steinbrecher, 31, said in the video, looking composed and smiling at times. This time, I'm sitting comfortably on a couch with my family, watching me in a warm and pleasant place, she said, trying to convey that she had not been broken. She said it was important for her to show everyone that I'm okay. As families and sympathizers at home and abroad doggedly campaigned for the release of the Israeli hostages, most people knew them only as faces staring out from posters. Now, with 16 Israelis freed since January 19th under the ceasefire deal with Hamas, Those haunting faces are coming to life in video clips, social media posts, and statements from relatives that provide glimpses of the joy and relief of freedom, as well as hints of the torment they endured. The brief messages they have sent out have mostly been expressions of gratitude to all who worked for their release, and pleas to not give up until the last hostage is free. The urgency of that message became even clearer on Saturday, when many Israelis were shocked to see the emaciated condition of the latest 3 hostages who were released: Eli Sharbi, 52, or Levi, 34, and Ohad Ben Ami, 56. Some relatives have said that the hostages released earlier were often deprived of food, suffered severe weight loss and muscle mass, and rarely saw sunlight. Family members said some of the hostages had at least occasional access to radio or television and heard or saw the relatives campaigning for their release, which helped them survive. Colonel Avi Benov, a doctor and deputy chief of the Israeli military's medical corps, told reporters that several of the recently released female hostages had spent the last 8 months underground in Hamas tunnels in Gaza. Some hostages who were released in November 2023 have described suffocating humidity in the tunnels that made it difficult to breathe. Colonel Benov said the first 7 women recently released were all suffering from malstarvation, while some still had shrapnel in their bodies from injuries they sustained on October 7, 2023. That was the day Hamas led an attack from Gaza on southern Israel that ended with about 1,200 dead and about 250 people taken back to Gaza as hostages. The attack ignited a 15-month war, with Israel's offense on Gaza killing tens of thousands of Palestinians and devastating the territory. Of the roughly 250 captives, scores were released during a week-long truce later that year, while some have been killed in captivity. More than 70 hostages have not yet been returned, including at least 35 who are believed to be dead, according to the Israeli government. A total of 25 hostages are expected to be released, along with the bodies of 8 others, during the initial 6-week ceasefire that took effect last month. They are being exchanged for about 1,500 Palestinian prisoners, some of them convicted of killing Israelis. Released Palestinians, many of whom who had been held without charge, said they face harsh conditions in Israel jails and detention facilities. Some of the Israeli hostages had been forced to appear in videos filmed by their captors in Gaza, a practice that rights groups have denounced as inhumane treatment that could amount to a war crime. Israel officials have called these a form of psychological warfare. A few months ago, Hamas's military wing issued a statement claiming that the hostages had been killed and released blurry images, apparently showing a body wrapped in a shroud. One close-up shot showed a tattoo identical to the one belonging to Daniela Gibor, which of one of a number of female lookout shoulders captured from a small military base near the Gaza border. But Miss Gilboa, 20, was freed on January 25th. Days later, she was singing at a party, making the discharge of the army lookouts from Benelson Hospital near Tel Aviv. She reflected on her ordeal in a lengthy Instagram post on February 2nd. She said her faith and observance of Jewish rituals had gotten her through. She thanked her supporters for not believing the rumors that she'd been killed in Gaza. Liri Albag, another one of the lookouts, celebrated her 20th birthday while recovering at the hospital. Miss Steinbrecher was kidnapped from her home in Kfar Aza, a rural community near the Gaza border. In the video she released, her appearance contrasted sharply with the hostage videos made when she was a pale with blonde hair pulled back into a braid. Her hair was now dark and neatly styled in a shoulder-length bob, as she was dressed in black, wearing long necklaces, a dog tag, and a yellow pin in solidarity with the hostages. She said she was no longer that person in the videos from Gaza. "I'm Doran. I'm 31. I'm no longer in Hamas captivity, and I'm home," she said. The recently released hostages have remained largely protected from the glare of the news media and have not given any interviews so far. Medical and mental health professionals say that preserving their privacy is essential to the long healing process. Footage released by the military of the hostages' emotional reunions with their close family members have given a sense of the elation surrounding their return. "Dad, I came back alive," another freed hostage, Romy Gonen, 24, shouted into a cell phone after being reunited with her mother on January 19th. Experts say that the long captivity causes physical and psychological harm, and that full rehabilitation will take time. "We're walking a very slow path," said Professor Noah Ikazimraz, the head of the returnees ward at Benelson Hospital. "Of course, we see ups and downs. Every day is different." Some of the free hostages returned with injuries from the October 7th assault. Emily Damari, 28, lost 2 fingers after being shot in the hand, was also shot in the leg. She is a fan of the Israeli soccer team, Maccabi Tel Aviv, and was at one of their matches last Monday. A video message from Ms. Damari was projected on the huge screen. She thanked the players, the management, and the supporters for fighting for her freedom. Ms. Gonen is still suffering from an arm injury and will need complicated surgery, her mother has said. Gadi Moses, 80, an agronomicist who was kidnapped from his home in Nir Oz, a village near the Gaza border, was released on January 30th, appearing gone. Almost as soon as he returned to Israel, he pledged to do all he could to rehabilitate his ravaged community. His niece, Efrat Makawara, later told reporters that Mr. Moses had been kept above ground throughout his captivity, but was frequently moved around. Shut in rooms alone, she said, he exercised by counting steps and pacing up to 6 miles a day, kept his mind active with calculations and other techniques, and he remained positive. When she first met him in the hospital, he reassured her, "I'm alive, I'm normal." Loneliness becomes an enemy, Ms. Makawa said. He managed to create a routine that kept his sanity. Millions will see the Super Bowl ad. Health experts and 2 senators aren't pleased. The spot makes a lofty claim about weight loss drugs offered by the telehealth company Hims & Hers, but says little about risks. The first scene the ad shows the scale. Over the soundtrack, the Childish Gambino's anthem, "This Is America," a narrator laments the nation's obesity crisis and the system that is built to keep us sick and stuck. It notes that $160 billion weight loss industry that feeds on our failures, as images of junk cereal, pie, and a cheeseburger flash across the screen. Something's broken, and it's not our bodies, the narrator says, adding, "There are medications that work, but they're priced for profits, not patients." The minute-long ad, which will run during the Super Bowl, pitches the life-changing solution to all of this: weight loss drugs, as offered by the telehealth startup Hims & Hers. Viewers see a fridge stocked with Hims & Hers branded vials and medications. These are compounded drugs, meaning they haven't gone through the traditional approval process designed to safeguard against risk to consumers, a point the ad largely glosses over. On Friday, Senators Richard Durbin, Democrat of Illinois, and Roger Marshall, Republican of Kansas, sent a letter to the acting head of the Food and Drug Administration saying the ad risks misleading patients. Nowhere in this promotion is there any side effects disclosure, risks, or safety information as would be typically required in a pharmaceutical advertisement, they wrote. The ad has also drawn the ire of some doctors who prescribe obesity drugs, as well as the Partnership for Safe Medicines, a coalition of nonprofit organizations, including some that are affiliated with the drug industry. The group sent a letter to the FDA on Thursday calling the ad dangerous, and warning it only discloses that the medications are compounded briefly and in a small font. The organization called on the Fox Corporation to withdraw the ad. Americans do not understand the safety profile of compounded medications. So when you take a drug ad and don't disclose it, there's a safety problem, said Shabir Imbar Safdar, the executive director of the Partnership for Safe Medicines. Kobe Brooklyn, the chief corporate affairs officer at Hims & Hers, wrote in a statement shared with the Times that the company is complying with existing laws and happy to continue working with Congress and the new administration to fix the broken health system and ensure that patients have choices for quality, safe, and affordable health care. Some experts were shocked by the ad's suggestion that a telehealth company, which profits from prescribing obesity medications, is standing up to the weight loss industry, not a part of it. They try to present themselves as anti-establishment, said Dr. Scott Hagan, an assistant professor of medicine at the University of Washington who studies obesity. But the company represents the cutting edge of basically capitalism in this space, he added. Hims & Hers and its rivals have used savvy marketing and convenient virtual prescribing platforms to bring compounded weight loss drugs to the masses. The company and other telehealth platforms like it have capitalized on a stipulation that allows compounding pharmacies to disperse their own versions when brand name drugs like Ozempic are in short supply. By some estimates, millions of people are now taking compounded versions of these drugs. Hims & Hers has said around 100,000 consumers have signed up for its weight loss program, which includes compounded medicines. The company's revenue jumped by over 50% from the previous year in the months after it started offering access to compounded weight loss medication. These compounded medications cost a fraction of the list price for brand name drugs. As the ad frames it, it's giving consumers access to the same kind of powerful medications, free of the bureaucracy of the system. Some experts disagree. The idea that this for-profit company is not exploiting you financially, it is making it a little bit cheaper to get a knockoff Ozempic. That is a wild claim, said Kate Main, the author of the book Unshrinking: How to Face Fat Phobia. To Mr. Safdar, the ad is like running an ad for a Cadillac and not telling anybody that the car you're selling is made by Yugo. It shows injector pens that look similar to Ozempic and Wegovy, but with brand names blurred out. He and other experts argue that the kind of oversight that comes with an institution like the FDA is critical to keeping consumers safe. Hims & Hers has said that the company offers access to medications compounded from facilities registered with the FDA and also provides certificates verifying a drug's ingredients. But the FDA has warned that there are risks to any compounded weight loss drugs, including overdose. The ad does note that the FDA does not evaluate compounded drug products. That message appears briefly at the bottom of the video before the narrator implores viewers to join us in the fight for a healthier America. He just engages in this sort of rebellious teenager language, said Adrian Bitar, a lecturer in American Studies at Cornell University, who is the author of the book on diet culture. But this is the absolute most mainstream capitalist endeavor you can get. 3 men convicted of playing a role in a ring that preyed on U.S. museums. A jury found them guilty of conspiring as part of a crew to steal art, sports memorabilia, and artifacts from smaller museums. For 2 decades, a crew from Lackawanna County in Pennsylvania traveled to a dozen small museums across the country, where its ringleader smashed through security systems to strip them of art and precious memorabilia. Their loot included treasured heirlooms from America's past, including 9 of Yogi Berra's World Series rings, 2 of middleweight Tony Zale's championship belts, and 30 golf and horse racing trophies. Instead of selling the memorabilia, they melted much of it down and sold it as raw materials. On Friday, 3 men involved in the theft ring were convicted in U.S. District Court in Scranton for conspiracy to commit theft of major artwork. The convictions followed testimony from the former ringleader of the group, Thomas Trotta, who pleaded guilty and became a central witness at the trial of the men, who had been his friends since his days at North Ponoco Middle School. According to federal prosecutors, Mr. Trotta broke into museums, while the other men assisted him by either planning the robberies, melting down the stolen items, or transporting them to be sold in New York City. 3 defendants, Nicholas Dombeck, Joseph Attisis, and Damian Boland, were also convicted of concealment and disposal of major artwork and interstate transportation of stolen property. Their sentencing has not yet been scheduled. A 4th defendant, Alfred Attis, was acquitted on all charges, and his brother, Joseph, and Mr. Dombeck were acquitted on several of the counts put forward by the prosecution. Investigators said in a statement that they had recovered antique firearms that were stolen in 2 of the thefts, but the whereabouts of many of the other paintings and stolen objects are currently unknown. Among the missing works is a silk screen by Andy Warhol, stolen in 2005 from the Everhart Museum in Scranton. Mr. Trotta and 3 other co-conspirators who have already pleaded guilty are also awaiting sentencing. The defense had argued that Mr. Trotta lied in implicating the men in his accomplishments. Matt Clementin, who represents Mr. Boland, told the jury that Mr. Trotta had made a corrupt deal with the prosecution. After the verdict, Jason Mattaoli, whose client, Alfred Attis, was acquitted, said, "The only one who pointed the finger on my client was Mr. Trotta, and there was nothing to back it up." In his testimony, Mr. Trotta told the courtroom that he and his accomplices surveilled museums to detect security protocols and identify potential getaway spots, and then later, he'd break in with tools like an axe, center puncher, or grinder. "This is our life for 20 years, Mr. Trotta said from the stand. It was absolutely a lifestyle." The Everhart Museum was one of their earliest targets, and Mr. Trotta said he'd hoped to steal Pink Shrimp, a 1921 painting by Henry Matisse, from its collection. But the museum sold it before they arrived, Mr. Trotta said, so they focused instead on Le Grand Passion by Andy Warhol and Spring's Winter, attributed to Jackson Pollock. Mr. Trotta said the opportunity to break into the museum surfaced one night 2 decades ago, when the police were distracted by a brawl that broke out at a bar in Scranton. Mr. Trotta said at that point that he, Mr. Boland, and Joseph Attis drove to the museum, where he used the ladder to smash the rear entrance of the museum and grab the paintings. The World Series rings were stolen from Yogi Berra Museum and Learning Center in Little Falls, New Jersey. Mr. Trotter testified that he and an accomplice barely escaped before the police arrived, and that later he brought the rings to Mr. Dombeck, who pried the gems off and melted down the rings in his garage. Mr. Trotter said they garnered about $2,000 from the gems and no more than $15,000 from the metal, and they sold them to a contact in New York City. Lindsay Berra, Yogi Berra's granddaughter, said that though she was happy with the verdict, she still felt grief over the loss of the rings. I keep thinking about just how senseless it was that all this stuff was melted and sold for pennies on the dollar, Miss Berra said. That will still never make sense, even with this closure from the trial. Tony Zale's boxing belts, taken in 2015 from the International Boxing Hall of Fame in Canatosa, New York, were also melted down. His great-niece, Haley Zale, who tracked the case from the courtroom, said it was gratifying that those responsible were convicted, but still sad to hear Mr. Trotter testify about destroying such historical artifacts for scrap metal. It's closer that the belts will never be recovered, and that I'll never see them again, she said after the verdict. It just solidified that it's time to move on. The whole experience was heartbreaking. The crew's downfall began in 2019. The state police in Pennsylvania pulled over a maroon Pontiac that was swerving. Mr. Trotter was arrested and charged with driving under the influence. In the car, the police found bolt cutters, a sledgehammer, headlamps, ski masks, gloves, and several phones. Investigators then traced DNA from a cup of water Mr. Trotter drank from while in custody and matched to the DNA found at several burglaries. I get sloppy, he said during the trial. Soon, Mr. Trotter was cooperating with law enforcement and wore a wire to record conversations with others in the ring, including Mr. Dombeck, who as a teenager had lived in Mr. Trotter's home and dated his sister Dawn. Mr. Trotter had fished and hunted with the Altos brothers, and they were the godfathers of his children. Mr. Trotter said from the stand, "I'm sure they don't like me now," he testified. Passengers restrained man who bashed a window on a flight. The man broke the window's inner plane and plastic frame before being subdued on a Frontier Airlines flight on Tuesday. The FBI is investigating.
There's two lights over here.
I got taxi.
I got it, baby.
You get the numbers?
I got you guys. Just right there.
Chaos erupted aboard a Frontier Airlines flight from Denver to Houston this week when a man started bashing a window and several seats around him, prompting other passengers to subdue him with shoelaces and zip ties until the plane landed. The struggle, captured on video and photos taken by passengers, began about 40 minutes into the flight 4856 on Tuesday night. The plane had reached its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet when the man broke the window's inner pane and its plastic frame. A case of air rage that an FBI spokesperson confirmed on Saturday was being investigated by the Bureau. So far, the man whose name was not released by the authorities has not been charged with a crime. It was not clear what led to his outburst. The flight did not have an air marshal, prompting the crew to ask if anyone on board had experience in law enforcement or the military, according to the passengers on the flight. Turner Phillips, 34, an Army veteran who was 6'5" and 240 pounds, said on Saturday that he was sitting about 20 rows away from the man. "The first thing I heard was other people yelling for security," Mr. Phillips said. He said his instincts kicked in quickly after the flight attendants asked for passengers to help over the plane's intercom. "I don't know if it's a terrorist attack," he said. "You could hear them kind of panicky. If he breaks that outer pane, then we're all in trouble." He said that another passenger gave him laces from his boots, and he tied the man's wrists. "Everyone in the plane came together so quickly and so efficiently," said Mr. Phillips, who lives in San Diego and is originally from Texas. After he learned that the man was not initially charged, Mr. Phillips said that he sent Frontier Airlines an email to express his frustration and received a response that he described as apologetic but blasé. "Sorry about your feelings, bud," he said, describing the airline's response. "I was like, are you kidding me right now?" Eric Starkovic, a heating and air conditioning technician from Katy, Texas, said on Saturday that he did not have any special training, but he could not sit by and watch. He's returning with his wife and a 13-year-old daughter from a ski trip in Colorado. The family was sitting about 10 to 15 rows away from the man. "I heard the commotion going on, him kicking stuff," Mr. Starkovic said. "Then, the next thing you know, he tries to punch out the window." Mr. Starkovic said the unruly passenger appeared to have cut his hands punching the window, which appears to have a crack on an inner pane. In a photo taken by Mr. Starkovic, blood can be seen on the window shade and the wall next to the man's seat. Mr. Starkovic, 45, who said he and about 4 other men rushed to intervene, described a frantic search for anything that passengers could use to tie the man's hands and legs. Mr. Starkovic said he and the other men took turns to arrest the 2.5 2-hour and 60-minute flight holding the man down and guarding him until they reached George Bush International Airport in Houston. Victor Sentes, a spokesperson for the Houston Police Department, said on Friday that Frontier Airlines had declined to press charges at the time against the man. Jennifer F. de la Cruz, a spokeswoman for Frontier, wrote in an email on Saturday that the FBI was investigating. Connor Hagan, a spokeswoman for the Bureau of Houston's field office, said that FBI was working closely with Frontier and the Houston Department as part of an investigation. He noted that the FBI has primary jurisdiction over investigating crimes that take place aboard an aircraft. The episode adds to a list of high-profile examples of air rage. In 2021, a Frontier Airlines passenger assaulted 3 flight attendants, punching one and groping the breasts of 2 others on a flight from Philadelphia to Miami, prompting one crew member to tape him to a seat until the plane landed. In 2024, the Federal Aviation Administration said that it had received 2,102 reports of unruly passengers from the airlines, a 1% increase from 2023. While the volume has leveled off from its height during the coronavirus pandemic, and the FAA developed a zero-tolerance policy for unruly airline passengers, the agency said that the recent uptick shows that it continues to be a problem. That is all for today. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.